Hi everyone, I'm Bhavi. Thank you for being on my channel again and again. And if you're new, please welcome back. This is a video where it will be about the medieval period, and of course, it requires prior knowledge. For that, the video of part 1, History of Psychology, is already uploaded. Watch that and then come to this part. I'm telling you this beforehand, so don't blame me if you can't understand anything. And of course, if you have doubts, just let me know. Now, here in medieval period, we will talk about how religion like Islam and Christianity started working with psychology and started focusing on Greek philosophers again, but they preserved Greek philosophers. They didn't talk about the Greek philosophers. They preserved the ideas and the ideology and the scientific learning of Greek philosophers, and they combined it with their religion, like Christianity, like Islamic world. And that is why I call it the amalgamation, right, of psychology in the medieval period from 400 to 1400 CE, which talked about faith, preservation of Greeks and the Islamic Golden Age, and for several centuries. So, 1 century is 400 years. So, several centuries means 2 or 3 centuries, or maybe more than that. We stopped talking about Greek philosophers and the learning and the contributions that they gave. So, basically, what we did is we neglected their thinking, neglected their contributions, and the medieval period was not a total blank for psychology. Now, when I say blank for psychology, it doesn't mean that medieval period did not talk about psychology. It talked about psychology, but it had two pathways. It had two tracks. It had two ways. So first, Christians people started talking about Christianity and psychology in the West, and Islamic world started talking about how to preserve the Greeks, their contributions, their philosophy, and translated and greatly expanded on Greek ideas. So they adapted, they expanded, they modified it. Okay, now we have early Christian thought, which is about a lot of things that we will of course study. We have Saint Augustine. Now, Saint Augustine is very important because what he did is he first of all, this Christian thought from 354 to 430 C is called patristic period, as I've already highlighted this. So important parts, I'm going to be highlighting it for you. And when I'm marking it with pen, it's not that important, but you have to read it properly. So it's not important, but you have to read it. If I'm highlighting something, then it is very, very important and it can't be ignored. Okay, great. So Confessions is written by Saint Augustine, and it is a book that he wrote for himself about his life because it is called an autobiography, and he basically talked about personal introspection. So in personal introspection, I'm highlighting it because it's important and can come in your MPhil, RCIM, clinical psych, whatever. It is very important for your clinical psychology exam, and that is why this will not be important for CUET perspective. However, if you want to study, that's great, but it is definitely important for RCI students and also for your knowledge in general. If you are into philosophy, psychology, philosophy, then of course, because psychology was initially a part of philosophy and physiology, but here we're talking about philosophy. Okay, so he engaged in personal introspection, which means that observe your own memory, motives, will, and inner conflicts. Because the normal introspection we talk about, it says that you have to look at an object and describe that object in your own words. But here we are talking about personal introspection. It means that not any random object, but your own thoughts, your own motives, your inner conflicts, your mind, your stressors. And St. Augustine talked about memory and how it is important. It's like a storehouse of the mind. Now, I'll tell you that on my last birthday, I went to McDonald's with my friends, and I got a cat stuffed toy because I love cats. So I got a cat stuffed toy for myself um, as a self gift. Right. I don't ask for gifts from people, but I like gifts, so I get it for myself sometimes. If others don't give me, if my parents don't give me, sometimes they forget about it. So what I do is I get gifts for myself. So I got a cat plushie, cat stuffed toy for myself, and it was very fluffy, very cute. And I still have it, but I don't cuddle with it anymore, right? So I know it sounds weird, it's like a story kind of thing, but I'm telling you that now I remember it because it is in my mind, it is stored in my mind. So he basically said that memory gets stored in your mind, and that is why it is called the storehouse of the mind. Is that difficult to understand? You can also like give your example in the comment section. Like maybe you remember your last birthday, maybe you gifted something to yourself, because of course self love is not just about doing the skincare and all. It is also about gifting something to yourself, something that you really like, saving it for it, right? So I saved up for that gift that I always wanted to buy, right? So again, it is also an act of self-love. Now here, the storehouse of the mind, an idea that anticipates modern cognitive model of memory that we will be talking about. Now he wrote extensively. Extensively means he was very passionate about it, right? And he talked about human will. So he said that humans have will, of course, and the conflict between competing desires within a single person, a theme later and echoed in Freud's idea of internal psychological conflict. And what does that mean? It basically means, hold on, sorry. Yeah. So it basically means that humans have will that we know, and he also wrote extensively, put a lot of hard work, and he was a tenacious man. Like, I don't know if it's true or not, but yeah, so he used to write a lot. So what he did is he wrote about human will and the conflict between competing desires within a single person. And let's not talk about Freud here. Let's only talk about what he said. And he basically said that you, as a human being, I have a lot of desires. So they have an altercation, right? Between them, they have fights and they quarrel with each other. That's what he focused on, right? He said that as a human being, I have a lot of desires and they compete with each other. Now, this is good for me. This is good for my friend. This is what my parents want. This is what I want. This is what my girlfriend or boyfriend wants, and I want to also get married. I also want to live a simple life, but I also want to live a sassy and a baddie life. That I don't want to get married. I have a lot of thinkings as well. I have a lot of thoughts as well. I have a lot of desires as well. So they compete with each other. That's what he talked about. Now, if I repeat things as I've already mentioned, I won't do it. Have any questions? Pause the video and ask me. You can even DM me on Insta, right? I think I'm not given my Insta, but I will. So Augustine Ben blended Platonic dualism. So he basically talked about that soul is immortal, which means that soul is immortal. It lives forever. Separate from and superior to the body. It is superior to the body, right? Body is a dross, according to your who Augustine. That body is not that good. It is useless. But your soul is superior to the body. Your soul is better than your body. Respect your soul, not your body. That's what he said. I know it sounds funny, but that's what he said. And self knowledge is achieved by turning inward and then toward God. So basically, in short, he said that if you want to gain self knowledge, if you want to achieve self knowledge, you have to worship the God. Surrender yourself to the God. Is that difficult to understand? I don't think so. It's very basic. It's just a philosophical stuff that he thought maybe it's good, maybe I should like write down about it. So he did, and that's why he said that self knowledge is achieved by worshipping the God and surrendering yourself to the God. Because in the end, you have to surrender yourself to the God. If you don't do it, you will not be able to get self knowledge. Now we have Islamic Golden Age from 800 to 1400 CE. Here, basically, they were from Baghdad, which is in Iraq, and Cordoba, I don't know where is it. Let me know. And they translated Greek text Plato, Aristotle, Galen into Arabic, because again the Greek texts were of course in Greece, right? And they were in Greek language and they couldn't be translated, right? It was very difficult to translate because of course it's a little difficult language, right? So what they did is they tried to translate the Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and many more Greek texts. Maybe these ones were the famous ones, so they translated these into Arabic because we are talking about the Islamic period, right? And Arabic was a famous language back then, and preserved them and added major original contributions of their own. So basically, first of all, they expanded it and they added their own ideas and they modified it. Mostly Plato, Aristotle, and Galen from Baghdad, which is in Iraq, and to Cordoba. I don't know where it is. I'm really not sure. So this period is essential for exams because it directly bridges Greek philosophy and European Renaissance. In short, this is something that you have to understand. Now we have other philosophers as well. We have philosophers of the Arabs, right? And these were very smart, very, of course, witty, smart people, full of knowledge, and very admirable, if that makes sense. So we have to talk about them because I'm really interested in this particular topic. It's quite interesting and it's intriguing to know, okay, maybe Islamic world has something to offer that we don't study in psychology, right? So we have Al-Kindi from 801 to 873 CE. I'll tell you the meaning of CE, but it doesn't really matter. You don't have to remember the dates. So he was a philosopher of the Arabs. He wrote on the intellect and is credited with early work resembling cognitive therapy. Now you might have heard about cognitive behavioral therapy. So he basically focused on that and his work was kind of similar to it. So it resembled similar to the cognitive therapy that we usually talk about nowadays, which is also called cognitive behavioral therapy. But cognitive therapy is not adding behavior in it. So his work was similar to the cognitive therapy, using rational arguments to overcome grief. When you use rational arguments, logical arguments, you overcome grief and negative emotions. So he basically talked about logical aspect. So have logical arguments and you will not be sad anymore. I don't know if it makes sense, but according to him it did. Now I'll use a pink color. Yes. If you love pink, maybe you can like my video. I don't know why I'm just saying that. But let's talk about our studies. Let's not get distracted. But I just love the color pink. I'm such a girly girl. And of course, if you are, just let me know. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, so El Razi. Wait, this is too pink. Shit. Okay, this is fine. This is fine. That was too pink. I couldn't see the text. Yeah, right. So Al Razi. Now we have Al Razi. So Al Kindi is called the philosopher of the Arabs. Al Razi Razes, a physician. So he was a physician who treated mental illness as a genuine medical condition requiring humane treatment. Humane is just human, don't get confused. So basically he said that mental illness is not something that is uh, happening because of spirits. So earlier people used to believe that if you are having a mental illness, you are suffering from a mental illness, you are uh, you know getting tormented by spirits. So it was believed by people that you are getting tormented by the spirits, and you should put a hole in your head, like we should make a hole in your head, and so that the spirits can escape, because they are stuck in your head, and to make them escape, to move them out of your head, you have to make a hole in your brain, in your mind, and from that hole they can escape. And that was so weird. And first of all, it didn't make sense. Second of all, they actually believed it and they were serious about it. They used to believe that you are tormented by the spirits, you are possessed by the spirits or by any entity, and that is why you are having a mental illness. But again, Al Razi said no, it is not because of that. It is a genuine medical condition that can happen due to so many causes. It is not just because of it. So he credited with running one of the first dedicated psychiatric wards attached to the hospital in Baghdad, which is in Iraq. I'm repeating it again, don't get confused, because I do get confused. So what he said, first of all, that a physician who was actually telling about mental conditions, and he did not stigmatize them, it was not a taboo. He basically said that it is all because of something actually happening in your mind, happening in your brain, but it is definitely not because of spirits. He focused on that, and he is credited with running one of the first dedicated psychiatric wards. He opened his first psychiatric ward, established his own psychiatric ward in Baghdad, which talked about treating humans and as humans, treating humans as a human, not as an animal, not as a person who is possessed, not as a person who needs exorcism, right? It does not need that. And then we have Ibn al Haytham al Hazan, very difficult to pronounce, wrote the books of optics, a landmark study of vision. Basically, he talked about vision, and he talked about how eye and brain process light and images. If I'm watching this video, if you are watching this video, how your eye and brain is able to process the light, is able to process the images, is able to process the text that are written on your screen. You can see this. How is it happening? And that is why he wrote the book of optics. And I'm telling you, when it is important, it is definitely important. Because of his rigorous experimental approach, some historians call him one of the earliest true experimental scientists. Why? Because he actually talked about visual perception that we will study, right, in psychology. Then we have Ibn Sina, Evan Sina. Okay, from again 980 to 1037. You don't have to remember. I'm just saying it just for the sake of it. You don't have to remember it, but it's just for your own knowledge, right? Perhaps the most influential medieval physician philosopher. His medical encyclopedia. It's like a book with pictures and a lot of information. That's called an encyclopedia. Sorry, encyclopedia. Yeah, sorry. So the canon of medicine was used as a standard textbook in European universities over 500 years. So he wrote this, the canon of medicine, his encyclopedia, and he basically talked about how medicine is given to people, right? He basically talked about something that is definitely related to medicine, and it was used in European universities to teach them about medicines over 500 years. So again, that's why he was not just important, he actually played a very important role in Europe. I hope you're able to understand this. And Avicenna described internal senses, like we have common sense, we have imagination. When you read a book, because I'm such a book lover, like I cannot just live without books, and I'm avid book lover. So when I read books, I imagine a lot. So my imagination just goes everywhere, just properly imagines the village if it is talking about a village, a town if it's talking about a town. I also think about the perspective of the narrator, the perspective of the different characters that are there in the book. So imagination is good, and it only gets better when you read. It does not get better when you just watch videos or watch movies. It gets better when you read something and then you imagine it. And that is why book reading is one of the best thing you can do to your brain, right? So common sense, imagination, estimation, and memory, okay, that processes information after five external senses. So we have eyes for vision, we have ears for auditory sensation, we have taste, gustation, we have um smell, right? So taste we have, eyes we have, touch we have, I think it's called skin, but I'll not mention that right now. It's touch. It's tongue we have skin, I'll write it down. We have nose for smell, okay. And then we have, I think, one, two, three, four, five. Yeah, so we have five external senses, and from the information that we're getting through these senses gets into our brain, and that's what he talked about. In short, this is something that we have been studying in psychology. All you have to focus in on encyclopedia, the canon of medicine, that was used in Europe for 500 years because it was that special. Okay, okay. After this, we will talk about European scholasticism, and we will take a break. Okay, before starting this European scholasticism, we will take a break for 15 minutes. It's a lot. I think you'll get distracted. Let's take a break for 5 minutes. Okay, it's enough. And he also talked about the links between emotional psychological states and physical illness, that how your psychosomatic system works, right? If you are not able to feel well, your body will not feel well. So basically he was a monist, if we talk about from that perspective, that he believed that it affects your body, and your body affects your mind, and your mind affects your body. So it's very important, and they both go hand in hand. So if one is not working properly, the other one will automatically dysfunction, get dysregulated, will have you know uh, issues, because if your mind is not working properly, your body will not work properly, and it goes the other way as well, right? So he basically talked about the psychosomatic medicine, which means psychosomatic means that your body and mind are equal, they are affecting each other. So if anything happens to one thing, it will happen to the other thing as well. Other thing will also get affected. Right. So when you have fever, you don't feel energetic, because apparently, according to monism, your mind and body affect each other. So why do you feel tired if you have fever? Or why do you feel depressed when you have fever? Because it affects your body and also it affects your mind. So it is not just like, okay, you have fever and your body is fine. Or maybe your brain is fine. No, your brain is not fine. You don't study when you have fever, you can't study when you have fever, because your fever is affecting your body, it is also affecting your mind. And he proposed a famous floating man thought experiment. A person suspended in space, deprived of all sensory input, would be still aware that they exist. So he said that, self-awareness as independent of physical senses. So he said that even if you are not having your sensory organs, even if you do not have your sensory organs working properly, you will still be aware about yourself. So when you are aware about yourself, irrespective of your senses working or not, it doesn't matter, right? And you are still aware, and that awareness is independent of the physical senses. It is not only limited to the physical senses. So, for an example, if I'm in the space, he did that floating man experiment, and he could not feel his sensory input. He could not feel the vision properly, could not hear properly. All the sensory organs were not functioning properly. They were dismantled. Something happened to them. And even if they were not functioning properly, even if the sensory organs were kind of dysfunctioned in the space, he was not able to process all the senses, he was still able to process that he exists. He was still able to process himself and the awareness around him, awareness about himself as well. That is all because of your floating man experiment, and that is why he came to this conclusion. He came to this. In nutshell, basically, he explained that an early argument for self-awareness is independent of the physical senses. That no matter what happens to your physical senses, nothing will happen to your self-awareness. It will be intact. I hope I made it easy to understand. Okay. Okay. If not, let me know. Feel free to ask as many doubts as you have. And of course, I'm not just saying this for the sake of saying it like our school teachers, but I do mean that, okay? So, because I want you to be curious, I want you to ask me questions and answers maybe I don't even know of. So, questions should be very difficult. Ask me questions that I maybe don't know the answer of. I have to search it. Even I teach you right now, but I even have to search for the answers because the question is so difficult to answer. You're so smart that you basically overpowered me, and you just made me feel dumb. And I want you to do that. I want you to ask difficult questions, because if you don't ask difficult questions, if you hesitate to do that, how will I learn from you? Because as a person who has been teaching for a very long time, I want my students, I want the people who are watching me, attending my classes, to know that I want to feel dumb. I want you to be smart, smarter than me, wittier than me. I want you to be intrigued about things, about something that is making me feel dumb. Because again, I want to learn something from you, because in the end, it is an exchange, right? Education, knowledge is an exchange. You learn something from me, I learn something from you. So it goes both ways, not just the one way that I'm teaching you and you have to listen. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I did a mistake while teaching you, and I want you to forgive me if I have made any mistake, and I want you to correct me. Okay? Yeah, so just don't feel hesitant. Okay, ask me whatever you want, even if it is a question that is so difficult. Maybe I don't know the answer of. I'll search it and I'll tell you the meaning. I'll search it and I'll tell you the concept. Okay, so don't hesitate. Learn something from me. I learn something from you. Maybe if you have any fact to tell me related to psychology, maybe you have to add something else in my notes. Maybe there's something else that you want to add. I'll give you the PDF. Add it. Okay, add it. Maybe you can text it. Maybe you can, you know, doodle anything, just add something to it, make it interesting, make it creative. It's totally up to you. It's your PDF. I'll send it to you, okay? Or maybe I'll put the link of this PDF in the description box if it is possible. I really don't. I'm not that technical, to be honest. But yeah, so I took that 5 minutes break, I think, while talking. I just don't want to make it boring, so I talk a lot. I never used to talk this much, but again, I think it is interesting to talk, I guess. I feel loquacious right now. I talk a lot. Anyway, so here is the exam tip: internal senses, canon of medicine, or the floating man thought experiment. The answer is Avicenna, Ibn Sina. Okay, you can call him anything you want, but maybe Avicenna is the word that could be there in our exam. Just remember this thing, okay? And internal senses, and he said that they matter a lot. And if it is mentioning book of optics, then you should choose Hell Hazen. And I hope this is helpful. The PDF is really good. I made it through I think Claude, no, not Claude, sorry, AI, Gemini. So you can also use Gemini for your PDF. If you want to generate a PDF on a particular chapter, just tell Gemini, it will do it for you. So that is good. Then we will talk about, okay, I think we have taken the break. If you want, you can pause the video and come back, but don't get distracted. Turn off your notifications, guys. Just do it. Now we'll talk about European scholasticism. From around 11th century, Arabic translation and commentaries, along with the original Greek text, begin flowing back into Western Europe. So again, the translations that happened by those Islamic world, they started coming back to Europe. So again, I told you that hundred of years, centuries after it came back to Western Europe, but centuries before, several centuries before, it was vanishing from Europe. It neglected the concept of Greek text. But now again, after or maybe from or after, I'm not sure, from around the 11th century, the translations that was done by the Arabic people, the Islamic world, they were coming back to Europe. And Western Europe, we're talking about specifically. So remember, it's Western Europe, right? Um, and also, you have to remember through Spain and Sicily. I know where it is. I think it's in Italy. I'm not sure. So yeah. So it happened from Spain and Sicily. This sparked the movement known as scholasticism. So when they came back to Western Europe, the Greek texts and the translated versions of it and the expanded versions of Greek philosophers and Greek texts, and when they came back from or after 11th century, the movement was known as scholasticism. Okay, that was a movement, and that was called scholasticism. We try to reconcile Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy. So Christians and Aristotle. right? There was an amalgamation. Now I will talk about Saint Thomas Aquinas. He was not Thomas Augustine. I think he was not Augustine. He was Aquinas. Okay. And I also believe that I think we should leave it to this topic. I should not extend this video because it's already been, let me check, 25 minutes, and we'll make part 3 where we'll talk about Renaissance. Okay, we'll just not make it boring. Right. So let's talk about this and we'll end the video. Now we'll talk about Thomas Aquinas, the central figure of scholasticism, the moment we talked about, and in his great book Summa Theologica, I think it's a Greek word, he merged Aristotle's idea of the soul as form of the body with Christian doctrine. So he basically combined Aristotle's idea that the soul as a form of the body, right? It is the form of the body. And basically what they did an amalgamation of Aristotle ideas and Christian doctrine, right? So they combined, they mixed it up together, right? He combined, and and organize a detailed hierarchy of mental faculties. He also talked about the hierarchy that you have senses, you have imagination, you have memory, you have reason, and building directly on Aristotle's and Avicenna's earlier work. So basically, what happened is he started working on the work that was done by Aristotle and Avicenna. That was something that we have to know. Right, and then universities were founded across Europe during this period. Oxford was also founded during this period, Paris, Bologna, creating for the first time institutions where philosophy, medicine, and natural science could be studied. So they created institutions. In those institutions, you can study philosophy. In those institutions, it happened in across Europe. And across Europe, they did not just talk about the famous subjects like science, like the boring subjects. They also added philosophy, they added medicine, they added natural science, and this is, I think, a valid data. And debated systematically. It was debated. I don't know what happened to my eyes. I just can't read properly today. Debated systematically, laying important institutional groundwork for science that would eventually become psychology. So what they did is, first of all, they made universities like Oxford, Paris, Bologna, and they started talking about philosophy in it. So you can go to those universities, you can talk about philosophy, you can study medicine, and you can also study natural science, right? And debate, and there's a difference between natural science and social science. Social science is when you look at the world, and natural science is like chemistry, physics, right? And debated systematically. And it was a debate that happened and laying important institutional work for the science that would eventually become psychology. So basically, that they're talking about other things that eventually became psychology, that eventually became a part of psychology, and then psychology became a separate discipline according to them. Like philosophy, we also talk about medicine in psychology, we also talk about natural science in psychology, right? So yeah, so again, it became a part of psychology later on. Why the medieval period matters for psychology? Why are we studying about it? Why can't we just stop? We are studying about it because here we learn about self-examination, Augustine, as a way of knowing the mind, which is called the personal introspection. So I'm adding P to it. Don't get confused. And then we talk about the Islamic scholars insistent on careful observation. We also talk about Alhazen. He said that careful observation is important. So again, we are studying about it because we're knowing different perspectives that were important, right, in psychology. And the classification of mental faculties, Avicenna and Aquinas. This is also very important. That classification happened, right? We talked about senses, we talked about images, imagination, memory, reasoning, rationalization. We also did study. We studied a lot of things, and these things are important for psychology. So later, when you study psychology, you know a perspective. You know that okay, this was also studied, mind was also studied, memory was also studied, both of which quietly prepared to the ground for the systematic evidence-based thinking of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. And then scientific revolution happened, and that is why we will talk about Renaissance, how it was linked to Renaissance, right? And now, because we have studied about this, now we are prepared for it because of prior knowledge to understand Renaissance. And in Renaissance, first of all, it happened from 350 to 1650 CE. And we talked about humanism, we talked about anatomy, and the birth of the word psychology. So here we are talking about how humanism was there, right? and how your body is made up of, how is the anatomy and the scientific study of the body we will study, right? And also renaissance is a word which means rebirth, and here we are talking about Greek and Roman learning, not just Greek learning, we're also talking about Roman learning, right? So here it was renewed. So now again we started translating Greek work in medieval period, but again when I talk about renaissance, we again started talking about not just the religions, but we also started talking about renewed interest in classical Greek and Roman learning, right? And combined with a new spirit of observation, we started looking at observation. We started looking at individualism, that you are an individual. Things can't be forced upon you. Inquiry into human being. And the two developments we will talk about is the rise of humanism, right? And we will talk about humanism is just a school of psychology that we have studied. We will also look at it from the Renaissance perspective. Renaissance is called rebirth, right? So again, we're talking about the rebirth of Greek philosophies, also Roman philosophies, right? Advances in the anatomical scientific study of the body. Here we will also look at the anatomical scientific study of the body. What is the anatomy of the body? That is also very, very important. Right. So we are not just talking about religions like we did in medieval period. We are again talking about observation. We are again talking about mind and body. We're not talking about religions. We're not talking about those boring stuff. No offense, it's not boring, but again, here we are again talking about the Western aspect of psychology. We are talking about the word psychology as well, which is of course the Greek word psyche and logos, and it first appeared in the work of German scholastic philosopher Rudolf Goclenius, whose 1590 book title used the term to mean the study of the soul. So he basically in his book, he was a German scholastic from that scholastic period, and he broke down this word psyche and logos, and he said that what, psychology is a study of the soul. So in his book he mentioned that psychology is a study of the soul. We study of the soul. So when we study the soul, it is the psychology, and it is not an actual word. It is a Greek word psychologia, which is psyche and logos. And in 1590, in his book, he said study of the soul, and then it came out as a separate word, and then it became in English, right? It became an English word. So this is something that you have to remember. However, we'll start it from the anatomy of the body. Andreas Vesalius, who basically talked about human body and how it is just scientific, right? We will not talk about it from religions and from different religion, Islamic world and Christianity. Here we will talk about completely scientific aspect of the human body, right? So he will not talk about old text, right? So he also said that Galen, we just talked about Galen for humans, and he basically said that Galen is not a good person. There are a lot of errors that is made by Galen. He is not a good person. Over thousands of years later, Galen was there, and he said that Galen made numerous plethora of mistakes, especially regarding brain and nerve structure. He said that Galen did not know the true meaning of brain and nerve structure. Galen did not know anything about it, and he made errors. So he wanted to correct Galen's errors, right? And the new emphasis on direct observation of the body. So it was scientific. So all you have to remember about Renaissance period is that first of all, it was rebirth, and second of all, it is scientific. So we are not adding any religions, any philosophy. We are talking about the scientific aspect of psychology. Tomorrow we will discuss it. If you have any doubts till now, ask me. If not, then we can end this video. I'm happy you watched it and I'm happy you enjoyed it. I hope you did. Thank you.